Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Maybe I Can podcast. I'm your host, Debbie Weiss. And today, my guest is Bridget Cook-Burch. Her clients call her the Book Whisperer. She's a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestselling author, mentor, trainer, mama bear humanitarian, and speaker known for riveting stories of transformation. Her powerful work has been showcased on Oprah, Dateline, CNN, GMA, the History Channel, NPR, and in People, among many others. She's the CEO and founder of YourInspiredStory.com and Inspired Legacy Publishing. She's also a co-founder and former executive director of She-Ros United, a nonprofit organization that helps women and girls rise from trauma. As a leader, storyteller, trainer, and humanitarian, her greatest passion is helping others to discover the importance of their own story and to become leaders in their own communities and worldwide. Bridget's many national bestsellers include Divine Turbulence, The Witness Wore Red, Shattered Silence, Skinhead Confessions, Leading Women, and Living Proof. Bridget, welcome so much to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here. As I mentioned, I was loving doing some research on you and finding out more about you. And I think what you offer, particularly to women, is quite astounding. So thank you for having me on here.
Oh, thank you so much for saying so. And right back at you as we'll get into as we learn a little more about you today. So let's just start off with my signature question, which is tell us about a time where you went from a defeated, I can't attitude to an empowered, hey, maybe I can do this attitude.
Well, I've had a lot of extraordinary stories, as all of us have. The one that came to mind as we were discussing things is really something that faces a lot of women. And that was I was facing a domestic violence marriage. I wanted desperately to make sure that my children were safe. And my brain was just full of I can't. I had not been the main breadwinner. I had been, let's get insurance and go on vacation and make sure that the kids are well fed. But to be the own caregiver of my children, that was daunting. And to try to figure out how to be able to do that. And then there were just all of the insidious voices in my head saying, no, you're not smart enough, you're not good enough. And there were some other things that were happening financially in terms of abuse that I really felt like I couldn't. And yet, I would love to say that I did it for me, but I didn't. I did it for my kids in the beginning. And it was one of those things that I think for a lot of parents, it kind of grows up inside of us, a mama bear situation where it was like, not on my watch, no more. I'd done everything that I could possibly think of. So even though I was afraid economically, mentally, emotionally, I wanted my kids so badly to grow up to be amazing, beautiful adults because they were amazing, beautiful kids. And there was something inside of me that said, not only can you, but you must do this. And it's quite interesting because I'd been an entrepreneur with all of these smaller things. And I started a phone book and a trucking company. And the phone book I eventually sold, and the trucking company I ran for several years. We started with a one truck wonder and went into multiple trucks, multiple trailers in 11 Western states. And it taught me so much about the power of will and what you can do. And I also went from, I had become a mouse in my relationship with men, especially with my husband. And I just became quite empowered, was able to have really honest and authentic and powerful conversations with the men all around me and some really incredible women as well. And so I went from I can't to, oh, heck yeah, I can. And it turned out to be one of the most formative experiences of my life.
Well, kudos to you. Let me say that I've worked closely with an organization called BW Nice, which stands for Business Women Networking Involved in Charity and Education.
Mm.
And we support domestic violence organizations, nonprofits in every county that we have a chapter. And so honestly, it's something that I'm lucky that it had never touched my life personally. But after so many years of being involved and meeting survivors, and I've actually had gone to volunteer and took a 40-hour course on domestic violence and domestic abuse. I can't even imagine how hard it was. Let me ask you, if you don't mind, was it a situation where you had to basically escape, that your husband or your ex-husband didn't know where you were, or were you in a position that you could just really have a conversation with him and leave?
Um, Conversations were rapidly deteriorating. And so I was having to develop a plan. And it became uncomfortable because there were people who told me that he said he wanted to kill me. Now, whether that was
Yeah.
the truth of the matter or not, he was telling some close friends, and they were concerned for me. He has, as in most situations, so many great qualities. And he's gone on to be remarried and has become an incredible grandfather. But there was a spiral that we were in that was quite dangerous. And I'm just really grateful that that both of us broke it in our own way. But it did take me leaving with the kids for there to be a reconsideration of the direction that we were going.
And it sounds like, thankfully, he did reconsider.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really grateful for that because I, of all people, believe in transformation. I have made more mistakes than most people on the planet. And I write stories of transformation, and a lot of my clients write stories of transformation. I just believe in redemption. And so I always held a space for that. And I feel like that's important for us to do for people in our own lives. It's not always reciprocated, but it is important for us to know within ourselves and to hold that space open for others, especially our kids.
Yeah, I think all of us moms can relate to that mama bear thing, right? I mean, when my oldest was diagnosed on the autistic spectrum at 2, that was it. That mama bear kicked in. Not like I didn't have it before, but it gets supercharged when you feel like your children are, I don't want to say in danger, but struggling or have something difficult in their path. Um, so yeah, it's like that adrenaline. If God forbid they were under a car, we'd be able to pick up a car, right? We'd find the
Exactly right.
strength.
Yeah. And the
Amazing.
adrenaline works in different ways, but it's definitely there for us.
So, okay, at that point, while you were married, were you working, was the trucking company, you said, you were financially, you were kind of like attached to him, didn't know how you were going to make it on your own financially. Did the trucking company come after you left?
Mhm.
And how the heck do you decide to start a trucking company? Like, where does that come from?
Well, it was so interesting because domestic violence and any sort of unhealthy relationship, it takes two. And I needed to get some of my own work done. I eventually started a nonprofit organization with incredible other women called She-Ros United. And it's about helping women and families rise from trauma. But at the time, I just knew there were things I didn't know. And I'd read the statistics about how prevalent it is across the world, but in particular little areas of society as well. And then also was just the fact that it was like, okay, if I'm to take full accountability and responsibility for my own life, I need to find out what these patterns are. I need to be able to create something new, like what you talk about is rewrite your story or write a new story. And I wanted to do it smart this time. And so I took some DV classes. I recognized so many women fall back into these patterns and go into another marriage or another situation or circumstance. And so I became very vigilant and adamant, and I was very careful. I didn't date for quite some time. And then after I was dating, I was very careful about those men around the kids, just as I was like, and a lot of people, it was just like not even one date because I could tell how they treated their own kids or what they were doing. And I was like, I'm okay if I'll be single for the rest of my life. But I was able to meet a very gentle man. And it wasn't for several years until later we had a long distance relationship. And then I was able to remarry, and he is amazing. So that turned out to be really beautiful. But long before that, I needed to take care of these kids. And I had a part time client that helped to make the house payment and food on the table. And I did other extra odd jobs. But this particular client, after my divorce, started hitting on me from far away. But what he was doing was would not have been accepted in the Me Too culture, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And so I just said, here in all these other areas of my personal life, I'm not allowing this. Why am I allowing this situation? And I fired him. And I was scared to death, but it was as if God brought me all these other opportunities. It's like, oh, you're not going to put up with this. Okay, let's bring you some other things. So I started the phone book first. It was wonderful because as I was a caregiver to my father, I was able to be with him and be home with my kids when they got home from school, and then go see my father and make sure he was in good shape. And there was a lot of family that pitched in, but um, it was so wonderful to be flexible during that time. And I will always forever be grateful, because then when I had a friend approach me, he's like, you're the serial entrepreneur, you work magic with businesses. What if we put our heads together and create something extraordinary? And so we did. And we decided to have a trucking company in a cutthroat industry that genuinely cared about people and had ethics. And we were able to do some amazing things with that for a time. And the only problem was is he didn't like that I was also writing on the side. And I had a client who was doing amazing things. We wrote a book called The Witness Wore Red, and she was the 19th wife of 65 women who put Warren Jeffs behind bars for life plus 20 years. She was very instrumental in that case of a prophet pedophile, and so courageous that knowing her changed my life in incredible ways. And we were being interviewed on CNN, and it was my third book. And they said, in front of my business partner, are you working on another book? And I said, oh, I'll always have another book. But he wanted me to be 100% focused on the trucking company. And it was like, as much as I'm excited about what we've grown and what we're doing, it's not my life's breath. And I finally, like you, when you realized you had to take care of yourself, finally, after all these years, it was like, what am I passionate about? What do I want to be doing? What are my gifts that I bring to the table? What could I do? And I loved storytelling more than anything. And these stories that we tell ourselves are the most important stories on the planet. And so, Debbie, it was like, if I could do anything, I would bring forth more of these incredible stories, because our world has been going through a lot of shifts and changes. And we see leaders who are often wounded and operate from that space. But I've noticed someone writes their life story, they heal so much, and they come to face the darkness inside of themselves as well as their shadow side. And when you can access that dark, you also have this pendulum swing of being able to hold such incredible light, knowledge, compassion, self compassion. And I just see leaders emerge, and that lights my fire. So I took a plunge. I left the trucking company, started my own business, Your Inspired Story. We've also started Inspired Legacy Publishing. And I've been able to just watch and guide extraordinary people to be able to tell their most extraordinary stories. And I love my work every single day.
Mm, that's amazing, amazing, amazing story. There are so many just things that you said that I want to go back to, but I'm going to go back to the beginning, because I love that you said that when you looked at your relationship with your first husband, that you realized it takes two, and you had to take a look at yourself and take full responsibility. And that's something that I talk about, and I feel very strongly about, because you could have easily said, poor me, how did I get in this situation? This is all his fault, and been the victim of your story. But
Mhm.
instead, you realized, okay, he has a piece of this and I have a piece of it too. Let me figure that out. And I know several people who have done just what you said. They just walk back into the same situation, different man, over and over and over again. And there's a reason for that. And they're not examining it and they're not taking full responsibility. And so I so appreciate that because you did that. Then look what happened. It's led you to live the life that you've dreamed of. Have you always liked to write? Did you always know you wanted to be a writer and write books, or where did that come from?
Oh, I was one of those avid like book nerds. So I was a tomboy and I'd be out playing football with my brother and his friends and things like that. And then the moment I could sneak inside, I'd have my nose in a book. And I had a mother who was a teacher, so she highly encouraged education, which was great. And she used to, her mother would limit the number of library books that she could take. And so she would leave a couple over at her friend's house and
Oh
another
my
friend's
God.
house. And she decided not to do that with me. And I did not have a limit. I had whatever the library would limit. And so sometimes I'd have 25 books scattered across my room, you know. Sometimes library fines would get in trouble. But that avid immersion into storytelling, I loved Diary of Anne Frank as
Mm,
much as I loved the Chronicles of Narnia. And I recognized patterns in humanity that I didn't even realize unconsciously so much this power of story until I started to really write them. And I always thought it would be cool to be a writer in the mountain with my cat and my dog at my feet and doing these beautiful things. But I came from education and engineering was my father. And I think it wasn't practical enough to think that
mm.
you could make a living in that regard. So I thought about being an attorney like To Kill a Mockingbird and until I saw all the paperwork and not enough interaction with people and stories. And so little at a time, I feel like I've been guided to this place.
Mm. And so now you help others tell their stories. People find you. Are they people who first time authors, authors who've written before? I mean, how do you help someone who has never done it before, but has their story on their heart that they feel that they want to get out there into the world? Writing a book is intimidating for those of us who have never done it before.
Yeah. And I remembered what it was like for me to write my first one. Like I was passionate and on fire because that through a whole, which a whole nother story, but a lot of incredible circumstances led me to this man. He was a former skinhead and he had become a father. It changed his life. And then he started using all of the skill sets that he had once used to destroy to build up and to teach and to educate. And he wanted to be a really good dad. And I loved that there were parts of me in his story, and his story was so intriguing, and I learned so much. So I began to hone my skills at that time. And then someone read his book, and she said, well, I think if someone could take a story of darkness and create so much healing, it would be you. And she said, I'm the daughter of the happy face serial killer. Would you help me write my life story? And Debbie, I was so floored. Like I just, in the moment, I could not imagine a story of hope and healing with a serial killer's daughter.
Yeah.
And I'm really delighted that I asked for guidance and I gave that one a chance because it has transformed so many lives. As I was working with these individuals, and I was mentored in the first book and then found I had a natural skill set. And so then I also began mentoring as I was helping people to write their books. And oftentimes they would tell me things that they'd never even told a spouse or anyone else on the planet. And we have a tendency to hold on to dark secrets. And as they say in the big book, you're only as sick as your secrets. So it was like the people who had been through more extreme stories seemed to come into my space. And I think it's because, well, I know it's because in my early 20s, I had a near death experience and I was in such a place of mental, physical, emotional darkness. I was working 3 jobs, going to school, and I just felt I had gotten very, very ill, but I just felt like I had blown everything and that I was not even worthy to ever be in God's presence, much less other people. Like I just was in this really, really dark space. And fortunately, I had a mother who still loved and accepted me, was worried about me, took me to the doctor's office. I collapsed. They took me to the hospital. And in the hospital, I was allergic to some medication, but they didn't know it. And I was given this incredible second chance at life. And because of that extreme transformation, like I was told, you are being given a second chance at life. And I just got to tell you, when I was in that space and I'm hearing nurses outside in the corridor saying, she's not going to make it until morning because we didn't know that one of the antibiotics they were giving me was killing me.
Mm.
It was like I knew I had not fulfilled the measure of my creation. And I didn't have any clue what that was, but I knew I hadn't done it. And that was like this, along with my mother's prayers, this single most prayer that went up is all I can say, and was answered to such a tremendous degree. And I think we all have that inside of us. You know, we have this one, this whatever your belief systems are, once in a lifetime, whatever this life is right now, we have this huge opportunity. And I think there is, like you said, this strong desire in certain people's hearts of, oh my gosh, I have a story. I just don't know how to get it from here onto the paper. And I remembered that. And I knew that. And I had experienced it and seen it. And so to be able to help other people to do it and know, oh, wow, I can teach people the mistakes I made. And I can also use all these tools to figure out how to do it better and how to do it well and how to not just have an expensive business card, but like something that could create tremendous social impact on the planet. That's my favorite thing. It just lights my fire. And I see that in people's stories. So I have people that will come to me when they've already written a book, usually when they're disappointed in it, usually when it's not been their very best. Otherwise, I get first time authors who are like, I'm going to give this my best shot. I want a legacy project. I want something I can be proud of and that was so juicy that people can't put it down. But I also want something that is going to impact people for the rest of their lives. And those are the people that I continue to get in the door and continue to be able to mentor, and their stories change me. I just have to say, every time I have a judgment, God will bring me another story, and it just goes way out the window. And I learn so much more about humanity. But I have been introduced to some of the most extraordinary people you have ever met. And I, wow, like I'm just in honor of it and awe every single day.
So let me ask you, because I remember when I was considering writing my book, and I thought to myself, what are people going to care? Because I don't have, luckily, I don't have that trauma, the skinhead, the father who was a serial killer. To me, I have ordinary people trauma, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, I don't have something that will pull you in like the second. It's funny that you said the skinhead thing when I was looking before I met you at the book description, and that was the one that drew me right in because I thought, wow, first of all, just the whole idea of a skinhead just makes me feel a certain way. But then to
Mhm.
read that someone was able to come out of something, a cult, basically, right? That they were raised in and it was ingrained in them. I love that awakening. And you wouldn't expect it from someone like that, right? That's
Yeah.
unusual, I would say. But what about those of us who, we still have a message, but we luckily don't have those big T's, right? The big traumas instead of just a bunch of little ones.
Exactly. And thank you for bringing that up because it is such a huge question that gets asked. And I will say this, we have rises and falls, we have emotions, we have the exactly what you said on the hero's journey that I can't to maybe I can to holy cow, I can, right?
Yep.
And every one of us has that. And even though our situations may be less extreme, the emotions are the same. the conflicts, the obstacles, the difficulties, and the rises and the overcomings. And so that's really, I write more of these extreme stories, but I have a lot of clients that are like, okay, on this spectrum, I'm in this smaller pendulum here. And the stories that can come from them are still absolutely compelling and extraordinary because humans learn from conflict. Humans learn from overcoming and the emotions and the obstacles. It's the language that we use, and it's raising the stakes so that we have an understanding of, as a character, this was my goal and dream. And then it was completely thwarted when this dangerous thing happened, whatever that might be, cancer or divorce or domestic violence or any of the things that humans face. And at first, I didn't want to be on that journey. And I was like, no, give it to her. Give it to
Yes.
him. Please don't give this to me. And we're reluctant. And then we begin to find that there is more inside of us than we ever learned or dreamed. And we discover more and more. And then the ride, it's just so beautiful because for every individual, it's different. And like I said, the emotions are the same, the triumph is the same, but how we get there is so unique and extraordinary. And this is where really great literature is born.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think we all get uplifted, even if it's not our exact circumstance, to just see that story of others who've overcome, especially when you're a person just sitting there feeling overwhelmed and struggling to see a way forward. And then you hear these stories and she did it. Why not me?
Exactly. Oh my gosh, if she can get out of bed in the morning, surely
Yeah.
I can go to work today, or surely I can be that caregiver, or surely I can go and manage this, and maybe I can even do more.
So tell us about, other than the two that you've mentioned, you said you've had so many different stories that have impacted you and the people that you've met. Does one come to mind that you were not expecting, maybe? Do
Yeah,
I'm saying?
I would share one that was just recently released and talk about like these circumstances that so many people would say, "Oh, you can just remain a victim. I wouldn't blame you." And instead, he ended up doing something extraordinary. So, Gary Lee Price was this little boy being raised in Mannheim, Germany on an army base, and he lost his mother and father through murder suicide.
Mm.
And he and his little baby brother were shipped back to Idaho and separated from one another. And he went from the fiery torment into even worse circumstances because the grown-ups were working nights and they didn't have any idea that a stepbrother who was 7 years older than him was actually abusing him in horrific ways. And Gary could have become a really bitter man. He could have become quite deranged, mentally unstable, and people would not have blamed him. But instead, he found two beautiful things. One was God, and the other was art. His mom had introduced him to art. It was his favorite memories of her. And he had teachers who recognized the trauma he'd been in, but they praised his art. And as his art continued to grow, even though his studies sometimes struggled, he became quite a famous painter in the area. And then when he found clay, it was like his whole life was made for this. And he became an internationally renowned sculptor. But at one point, Dr. Stephen Covey had commissioned him to build or to sculpt a monument. Dr. Viktor Frankl, who had survived 3 concentration camps, had said in Man's Search for Meaning, the United States needs to have a statue of responsibility because you cannot have liberty without responsibility. And so Gary found out about Dr. Frankl, did some study, recognized that he understood him because of what he'd been through. And in no way has he ever compared his situation to a concentration camp, not in any way. But he understood the suffering, the loneliness, the heartache, not knowing if you're going to survive for another day and being starved. And so he absolutely like took this project on, and it went through its own rises and falls. Like the Statue of Liberty, it's had its own situation, but it will be something we will be seeing in our lifetime. And there are some amazing things that are happening right now with it. And it just goes to show, like, from these different spectrums of our life, is we have the opportunity to do beautiful things. And sometimes I think when we have been traumatized or hurt or just daily small things, we can sometimes allow those things to beat us down into submission, into mediocrity, into thinking that, well, I'm just not worth that, or who am I to have a big dream? And what I love about, sorry, I get emotional. What I love about Gary's story, I especially think at this time in human history when we have faced so much and when there has been so much tearing apart of one another and a lot of complex trauma that our children and children's children are facing between, what's been happening in schools and in our country and across the world in war and other things. His sculpture is that of one hand reaching down to lift another.
Oh,
And it's, anyway, to write the book again transformed me. And I'm a huge proponent of this monument because it's bigger than just a statue, it's a movement. It's going to be 305 feet at least, maybe 350 feet tall when it's done. And it will have extraordinary education for children on what does it mean. You and I started this conversation on
yes,
responsibility and accountability, right?
exactly.
And
Exactly.
so teaching children young what that means and how to take care of the entire planet, how to take care of one another, regardless of skin color or background or situation,
Yeah.
ethnicities, religion, and race,
Yeah.
that we're each other's keeper. What happens to one happens to all.
Absolutely. Oh, where is the statue going to be?
Well, at one point, they were hoping California because it was one of Dr. Frankel's favorite places to teach. And there is going to be a statue going up at Alliant University, which is great. But it looks like California would take more than 20 years just to get the permits to build,
Wow.
with what is happening in their public sector. And it looks like right now the state of Utah wants it, has a place for it on these old prison grounds, which, me and redemption, like,
Yeah.
that just lights my fire, especially because She-Ros United taught there for 5.5 years before
Mm.
the new prison was built. And even Lowry Snow, who is the one of the co-chairs of this project called The Point, he said how he finds it absolutely beautiful that something so magnificent about responsibility could be erected upon a place that hopefully stands for redemption and this ability for us to reach down to one another and to educate and provide amazing new chances.
I'm speechless and I just have the chills because, wow. Like you said, the responsibility and listening to that story, it always reminds me that there are, like you said, Gary had a choice, right? And we all have a choice. That might not be our story, but we can sit there and say to ourselves, there's no way, look at all that has happened to me. I often think of that with Oprah. I mean, how many other people, and like Gary, okay, maybe the murder, suicide, and all, but being in a foster home or being abused or all of those things, or Oprah's circumstances. And I'm only saying that because there's millions of other people who have had something similar, but then don't rise because they've made the choice to not take responsibility and to let those life circumstances define them and really hold them back from the life that they could and should be leading and deserve.
Yes. And the most beautiful thing is when we get to this place where we recognize, oh, I don't have to stay a victim. I can be a victor over my circumstances. I don't have to play small. When I went through that myself, as I mentioned in the beginning, you went through that yourself.
Yep.
I loved before we got on and you talked about your situation and other caregivers, and that you wanted to stand for more than just the dark and the hardness of being a caregiver. You wanted to be in that triumphant, victorious category, to be known for that, to have the message for that. And it's beautiful that you have done that as well.
Well, I appreciate that. And we're just both trying to do the same thing to get those stories out there, to bring people into their life's purpose and know that there's more on the other side of that rainbow. So, as we start to wind down, I don't want to stop without asking you about She-Ros. Because one, I love the name, I love the purpose, and how did it all start, and what does that organization do?
Well, beautiful. Thank you. Well over 10 years ago, other businesswomen in our area got together. We were recognizing a couple things. So Maya Angelou was supposed to come and speak, and we all deeply adored her. And then she was falling ill. And there were so many women that were saddened by that because they wanted to be around someone empowered. And we decided to put on an event, and we recognized that there were, out of this group of businesswomen, that each of us had been on our own Shero's journey or hero's journey, and that we didn't stay there in that victim circumstance. And there was domestic violence, there was human trafficking, there was sexual assault. We had some incredible women warriors who were first responders or veterans, including my co-founder, Celeste Gleave. And it was like, what do we all have in common was this rise out of trauma and choosing not to play small, and recognizing too that part of the beauty of learning to rise for yourself is that you can become a leader within yourself first, but then within your family, and then your community, and then the world. And that we kept seeing that pattern within ourselves, but also all around when someone would make this choice. And sometimes it just meant they deserved some education. And so we were asked to give a training for women that were fleeing Congo, that were refugees. And the leader said, "My country is at war. The war is with women, and the weapon is rape. Could you create a program that would help them to become leaders and victors, because we feel that it is the women that will create the huge change in our country." And I just got to tell you, Debbie, it was another one of those situations where, like, oh my gosh, who am I to write a training program about this? And it was a defining moment for our whole organization. And so I wrote the training, but it also was inspired by all these incredible women that we had come across, including Rebecca Musser, the 19th wife of 65 that I was telling you about, and hearing her stories and being able to write her story and capturing these other stories. And we're like, this is not a cultural phenomenon, it is a world phenomenon. And we need to collect stories from all around the world to have women rise. So we've been using those stories, including some of these from the Congolese women that we met that were extraordinary, and from women in prison, and women coming out of trafficking, and women in domestic violence shelters, and those who are choosing to rise. We've been collecting their stories, and we've been teaching how to retell a story, how to rewrite, how to create a new, absolutely new book at times. And it's been absolutely amazing. So we're continuing to do this in the prison. We would like to get our program out into prisons across the United States and other places. And we're doing some extraordinary work also with the Statue of Responsibility, just in terms of getting the word out, because we're all about that, being the hand eventually that reaches down, because sometimes we are the hand that needs a hand up. And then our program is about becoming that hand that can turn around and reach down. And so we have women who have left prison who have become some of our greatest leaders. It is amazing.
Hmm. How can we learn more about the organization? And is there anything that myself or the listeners can do to help the cause?
Oh, absolutely. We were doing a lot of live events before COVID. And so that kind of put a kibosh on so many things. So we ended up rebranding, starting over in certain arenas. And now we're really focusing on getting these programs in across the country. And so if you would like to be a volunteer, we would love to hear from you. It's She-Ros United.org. We welcome women of all different backgrounds and situations and circumstances to join and be a volunteer. And of course, donations are very helpful just because the logistics that it takes for us to train more women and to be able to get these training programs into other places. Our whole premise right now is that we make 100-year impact. So when someone crosses our path, that we can make 100-year impact, and that means it affects the person and their children's children to such a degree that it breaks the cycle and moves them in a totally different direction, but that it's unearthed inside of them. And so we would love it. And so SheRosUnited.org is our organization, and we would love to have you as one of our She-Ros. And we have a lot of She-Ros heroes as well.
Bridget, you have been just, for those who are not watching the video, Bridget is just this bright light that's coming through into my little office here. I can feel it as she talks and I look at her glowing. You are such an inspiration. You're just everything that you are doing, your mission. It's inspiring. And I can't thank you enough for sharing it with me and with our audience. I will, of course, put all your links in the show notes, but please let everybody know where to find you, what you have coming up, and all the things.
All the things, I definitely will. And your exciting new news as well. We'll be sure to share that out.
Well, thank you. But go ahead, give your website. Where can they find you on social?
Beautiful. Thank you. So my website is yourinspiredstory.com. And I welcome you to come and find, and there's a place that you can sign up for a free one-on-one as well. We can discuss your story and how to take those next steps. I also have inspiredwritersretreat.com. And it's I do it a couple times a year in a beautiful natural setting. And it's a place for 3.5 days of intensive work on your book. So I would love to see you there as well.
I have to be honest, I was looking at that writer's retreat thinking, ooh, that sounds wonderful.
It is a wonderful experience.
So make sure to check it out. Bridget, again, thank you so much for being here and for all you're doing for all of us and the world.
Thank you, Debbie. Such an honor and a pleasure. You're doing it too, and I love that.
Well, thank you. All right, everybody. I'll see you next time.